Thank you very much, Ms. Garantoni, for your introduction. Your Excellencies, first I would like to thank the Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs Journal, Kalam Research and Media, the Libyan Institute of Advanced Studies, and Dr. Lukas Katsonis, Dr. Aristachos Grekas, and Mr. Stefanos Miklineos, for organizing this wonderful event, this important event, and inviting me. My name is Burweila. I am the ambassador of the European Public Law Organization to Libya and North Africa, and also the founder and director of Code on the Road, a nonprofit focused on providing business entrepreneurship and software training to young men and women, and with also a research focus on building resilience to extremism, whether right-wing or religious. My speech today will focus on the role of Greeks in Libyan history, Greek Muslims and Greek Christians in general, but also I'd like to give a context to why this discussion is so important and why this conference, the second conference, is so important for Greece, for Libya, and for our region. Today, Greece and Libya face a common threat and a complicated threat from Turkey, where we see, as previous speakers have outlined before, a weaponization of history, weaponization of the heritage of the Ottoman Empire. In Libya, we've had it a little bit more rough in the past 10 years from foreign threats. After NATO intervention in 2011, the country fell into total chaos, and there was a vacuum, a power vacuum for various actors. And unfortunately, this vacuum was filled with both local and global militant jihadist groups, ranging from ISIS, Al-Qaeda affiliates, as well as local Libyan groups. And this was a huge threat, not only to the basic right of human life, but it was also a huge threat to our interests, our economic interests, our security, and of course, our cultural heritage and religious heritage. One of the threats that we face today in the Arab world is an existentialist one. We are fighting a battle for our soul, the soul of our religion and the soul of our heritage, from a new manifestation of ideology, a religious ideology, mostly commonly known as Islamism, which seeks to erase cultural heritage, seeks to erase multiplicity of cultures, multiplicity of tribes, multiplicity of peoples, and to erase tolerance amongst us, between Libyans themselves, between Libyans and their environment and their neighbors, between Christians and Muslims, between Muslims and people of other faiths. Until recently, this was a battle that we fought bitterly, and it was only until 2017 until the army defeated the last stronghold of militant jihad in the Far East in Derna. And around that, and earlier in 2016, thanks to heavy bombardment by the American Marines, ISIS, the Islamic State in Sirt, was destroyed. So it's only a few years now that we managed to eradicate serious threats to our cultural heritage. And we have seen what this ideology, this dangerous militant ideology, has done in Syria, in Palmyra, what it has done in Afghanistan, and what it's done in other areas in North Africa and the Middle East, with not only destroying and persecuting civilians, but also destroying artifacts, antiquities, and cultural heritage. Now, why is it that they do that? The reason they have this focus on destroying antiquity, destroying evidence of cultural heritage, is because they need to clear the state, the slate of people and their loyalties. They see opposing and different ideas as a challenge to their creed. They see it as a challenge of loyalty. And they see anything that has to do with the national or historic heritage to be dangerous. Very much how fake news articles depend on erasing context. It is the same with history. And that is why it is important to focus on cultural revival in Libya, to show that our history is rich. We have very different ethnicities. We have different traditional views of Islam. We have Sufis. We used to have a very large Jewish minority as well. So this is why. So we are today in a battle to reclaim our heritage from those who would threaten it. And while we have been successful in removing radical Islamist militants from most of the country, our capital has now become under foreign occupation. Foreign occupation by Turkey, which is currently led by a radical AKP regime. And what we see historically in the past few years, while ISIS has been destroyed, it seems that the leadership in Turkey has picked up the baton of extremist rhetoric, extremist expansionist plans, not only vis-a-vis Greece, but also in Libya. Recently, both our foreign ministers have had to spar with the foreign minister of Turkey. Our own foreign minister, when she requested all foreign forces to be removed from Libya, Turkish proxies attacked what they thought were her premises. And recently, when the Turkish foreign minister visited Greece, there was an attempt to weaponize identities in northern Thrace. So while we had been victorious against global and native militant jihadist groups, we find ourselves today, our capital under occupation by a foreign country that subscribes to a very narrow form of political Islam. So one of the reasons I find this panel, this conference extremely important is that we shed light in so much nuance and complexity of not only Greek history and Hellenism, but also in previous panels. Dr. Nayed has spoken about the rich Greek heritage and legacy left in Libya. And I'd like to I'd like to build on that and to remind Libyans and Greeks alike that our heritage in Libya did not end with ancient Greek history. Greeks, Muslims or Christians have always been part of the Libyan social fabric. In fact, in the city of Benghazi, where I'm from, Benghazi, the capital of Syria, one of the best schools in our city was founded by the Greek expat community. And if we were to go to the Ottoman Empire, we see Greek Muslims playing a pivotal role in history and maybe in unexpected ways. For example, there is the story of Ahmed Karamanli, Muslim Janissary, said to be from Crete. And Ahmed Karamanli was a Janissary who staged in 1711 a coup against the Ottoman Empire, and he installed himself as the ruler of the Kingdom of Tripoli. Now, it wasn't really a kingdom, but it was referred to as such. And he began the powerful Karamanli dynasty, which lasted for a little over 100 years. And in that period, it was the first time in Ottoman Libya that a province of the Ottoman Empire showed any kind of independence. Of course, the independence ended a little over 100 years afterwards, when the Ottomans reclaimed Tripoli. And ironically, we're in the stage again where the Ottomans 100 years later are trying to reclaim Tripoli. But this is one of those stories that slips through the cracks to show that the role of Greeks in Libyan history is very varied. It is, we don't need to go back to ancient times to show the richness and the complexity of their contributions. In fact, in 1971, the population of Greeks in Libya was 100,000. at a time when the Libyan population itself was around 2 million. And they played a huge role in shipping, in construction, in cultural exchange, recovering also with the Italians our cultural heritage and antiquities. So what I would like to emphasize before I wrap my speech up is the importance of introducing both to Libyans and Greeks and to the Muslim community and the Christian community and the Jewish community how rich our shared cultural heritage is. And at least between Libya and Greece, this is a history and a relationship that is based on mutual interest, friendship, and solidarity. And that is the kind of friendships that both Greece and Libya welcomes and needs, especially in a time where we are facing perhaps a revived and old threat. So I'd like to thank once again the Foreign Affairs Institute, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, KRM, LIAS, and Ms. Garantoni for hosting me. And I hope this is the beginning of more and more conferences and cultural exchanges.
Η κυρία Burweila ή ο κύριος Σαλομπέιτ να προσθέσουν κάτι πάνω σε αυτό.
I'd like to say I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Kyriakidis, and it is important at this stage. And this is what I try to emphasize or to bring to light in my speech, is that we Muslims, we have a very, very rich Islamic history, Islamic culture. And since the 1920s, with the establishment in the end of the 20s with the Muslim Brotherhood, which was a political strain and approach to religion, we have been in a struggle because this is not our traditions. And this politicization of spirituality is actually very divisive, it is very polarizing, it is very dangerous because it no longer becomes about spirituality, it becomes about power. And when any issue becomes about power, violence usually follows. So it is very important to us, even in studies when we, in building resilience to extremism, when we look at cases of violent jihadists, many of them are not educated in their own religion or traditional Islam. And this gap in their education on Islamic heritage is what makes them vulnerable to recruitment, what makes them vulnerable to recruiters who present Islam as sterile, Islam out of context, Islam that has been manipulated and hijacked. So I really believe that culture can play a huge role and education can play a huge role. So today we are also fighting our own battle in the Muslim community against those who want to erase our Islamic heritage. We want to regain our soul. We want to protect our youth from this mentality. We want to remind them of how rich our history is in tolerance, in different views, even of religion. I think tolerance and diversity is a strength. I think our neighbors have been a strength. And indeed, Greece has played a huge role throughout history. I've often been fascinated by the Greek diaspora because you find the Greek diaspora all over the world, in the States, in Australia, in Africa, all over the world. And they're always being very, very constructive to the communities that they're in. They're not divisive. They bring their traditions. So I do agree that a huge role can be played if we emphasize what we have in common. If we do combat those who try to divide and polarize and weaponize heritage. So I just wanted to say that I agree with Mr. Kyriakidis.
Θα ήθελα πολύ να ακούσω με ενδιαφέρον την τοποθέτηση και της κυρίας Burweila πάνω σε αυτό, καθώς έχει και προσωπική και πολύ μεγάλη εμπειρία πάνω στο μεταναστευτικό ζήτημα.
Thank you, Marilena. I'm going to speak about the refugee crisis of the past few years. I think when we look at the refugee crisis, we shouldn't treat it as some sort of random biblical event that these human beings came out of nowhere. If you look at all the biggest refugee crises of the past 20 years, they were preceded by war. Wars that these people did not initiate. So you cannot divorce refugees from war. This is something I've tried to repeat many times to activists for refugee rights, that to truly be an activist for refugee rights, you also have to be anti-war, because refugees are a symptom of a great tragedy and a great evil. A lot of people forget the verdict of the Nuremberg trial. And the Nuremberg trial said there was no greater evil than war, aggressive war. So I want to emphasize that refugees are not a random biblical event and disaster. These are people who are fleeing tragedy. They're fleeing for their lives. So to solve that, we must respect that, we must acknowledge that. In cases of refugees from Syria, in the past few decades in Europe, we see that there has been a spike in jihadist and terrorist activity, and we see that followed by a spike in the right wing. What we see, a phenomenon that's very difficult to battle today in Europe, is the phenomenon of reciprocal radicalization. So extremists and a fringe in one group radicalize the fringe in another group. And what's happening with the refugee crisis is that people are lumping all refugees, all Arabs, with this minority. And also the fact that Europe is facing, in countries like France and in Britain, a failure of integration. And this failure of integration has multiple reasons. That bears responsibility not only on behalf of some members of the migrant community, but also in policies of the governments that host them, that actually encourage separation and isolation of communities and their ghettoization. So I think one of the reasons what we see this, and of course we have people who weaponize this. One of the what I mentioned earlier was the weaponization of heritage. I was very upset in November of 2019 when Prime Minister Erdogan tried to use refugees as blackmail. And he would threaten Europe and say, we're going to flood Europe with people. What he was implying to people was that refugees weren't human beings fleeing tragedy, that they were weapons. And this contributes to polarization and hostility against refugees. I try to work with human nature and not against human nature. We spoke so much about how cultural heritage, most conflict results from cultural heritage or various manifestations of heritage. So I try to balance a country's need with perceptions of coping with human rights. So I think we must emphasize that the refugees, at least from Syria, I cannot speak for Libya because we don't have that crisis between Greece and Libya. But I think we must emphasize, and I think Dr. Arif Al-Arbeid's presentation has shown that Greeks need not fear from the Syrian refugees, that there's going to be a community within a community. This community of Syrians are already very close to Greeks culturally and ethically. So that's, I can go on forever about this, but I won't. And I hope my answer was covers the basic.
Τα πολύ νεκρά ναυάγια που προέρχονται και από τη Λιβύη, που δείχνουν όμως την αδυναμία της Ευρώπης, μιας Ευρώπης που αδιαφορεί για τα αίτια και εστιάζει περισσότερο στην αποτροπή.
And that's horrible because for Greece and Italy, so the Libyan refugee crisis is more between Italy and Libya because the refugees that pass through our country go through Lampedusa. So we see Greece was actually in a very difficult situation when the crisis broke out because there was austerity, there was a financial crisis. So there's a joke. Sometimes I like to say that the Greeks are not, the asylum process isn't so difficult. They're not doing this on purpose because there's plenty of funding from the EU for this. I'm just saying the Greek public sector is a nightmare for everybody. So it's actually equal opportunity for everybody when it comes to the crisis. But even Europe failed Greece and Italy because there is a quota of solidarity sharing, of burden sharing, which they refused to do. And they allowed Greece, a country who did not have a system in place, likewise Italy, to cope with a huge inflow of human beings, which is actually very, very difficult. And I know this because Libya is also a refugee transit zone. There needs to be infrastructure and proper infrastructure in place. There needs to be a counter-corruption task force in place because there's a lot of funds that go to helping refugees in Greece and in Libya that are diverted elsewhere. So I think Europe has failed Greece and has failed refugees. And they need to remember that the human need for a better life is an insuppressible need. And the next stage, I feel, in the next 10 years, and the sooner the better we focus on this, the better for everybody, is to see how we can make origin countries a better place to live so people do not have to flee. Most people want to stay in their homes. They don't want, it's very difficult to be an immigrant. And the Greek diaspora will tell you this. My parents left Libya. My father left Libya when he was a very, very young man. It needs quite a character to be able to go and be enterprising and to build yourself. Most people want to stay home. So I think the next stage for European countries is to combat people who create conflict, combat predatorial nations, and to stop war and make these countries an economically viable place for these people to live in. So they don't have to suffer and take this journey.
Συμπερασματικά, συνοπτικά και πολύ γρήγορα για να κλείσουμε και να δώσω το λόγο στον κύριο Κατσόνη.
I'd like to quickly say thank you very, very much. And this has been an amazing panel and conference. And this is one of the reasons I feel very privileged for having grown up here, because the spirit of debate and discussion has never died here. And you see movements around Europe trying to stifle debate or control debate. Here in Greece, there's a real spirit of the Agora. So somehow the spirit of ancient Greek philosophers have lived on. We can still fight, we can still debate, we can still discuss. And I feel very, very privileged to be able to learn and speak in this environment. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the organizers of this event. It was my honor to be here.